Nobody expected what would unfold that night. Chuck Norris, the man behind the legend, walked into the Late Show with Stephen Colbert's studio under warm lights and louder cheers. The audience was on fire, part nostalgia, part reverence. After all, Chuck wasn't just a man, he was an internet myth. Roundhouse kicks that could stop time, punches that broke physics. Everyone knew the jokes. But they also knew the man had earned them. Chuck walked out smiling, calm, dignified. A well-fitted suit replaced the martial arts G, but the stillness in his eyes? That hadn't changed. Stephen Colbert greeted him with his usual smirk. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who once high-kicked the concept of fear itself, Chuck Norris. The crowd laughed and Chuck nodded. Good to be here, Stephen. At first, everything flowed smoothly. Colbert opened with classic banter about memes and Chuck's iconic action films. Chuck, used to the routine, chuckled graciously. I take them as compliments. If people want to believe I once punched the moon into orbit, who am I to stop them? Then something shifted. Stephen's tone got sharper. So Chuck, Colbert said, sipping from his mug with mock sincerity, at what point did you realize that being a punchline was more lucrative than being a puncher? The crowd tensed, a few awkward chuckles. Chuck, ever composed, raised an eyebrow. I've never minded being laughed with, just a nod at. Colbert leaned forward, theatrical. But isn't that the problem? You've become more myth than man. These days, you sell exercise equipment more than inspiration. Chuck didn't flinch. I've inspired a lot more people off-screen than I ever did in a movie. Respect, discipline, that's what martial arts teaches. Stephen grinned. That's rich, coming from someone whose last big hit was, what, Walker? Texas retiree? The audience groaned. Chuck didn't smile this time. His voice was steady, slower. Are you trying to interview me or humiliate me? Stephen waved his hand playfully. Chuck, come on. It's late night. We tease, we roast. You've dished out hits your whole life. Surely you can take a few jabs. Chuck's voice dropped a note deeper. I didn't come here to fight, but don't mistake my silence for weakness. For a moment, the air went still. Stephen shifted in his chair. The audience sensed the tension blooming. And don't mistake clever words, Chuck added, for actual wisdom. For a few seconds, the audience wasn't sure if they were watching an interview or the beginning of a standoff. Chuck Norris, still seated, didn't blink. Stephen Colbert, on the other hand, shifted his mug twice, trying to regain the balance of the moment with a chuckle. Chuck, look, he said, grinning too wide. I know you've kicked bad guys off rooftops and probably even scared death into retirement, but these days you're more Grampy Karate than Kung Fu Commander. Chuck leaned back, his expression unreadable. Respect is one of the first things you learn in martial arts, he said slowly, and one of the first things you lose in show business. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Some clapped nervously. Others looked at each other, unsure whether this was still part of the act. Stephen tried again. I'm just saying, maybe the whole invincible hero routine is a little outdated. The world has changed. Chuck nodded. You're right. The world has changed. Unfortunately, the cheap shots haven't. It hit hard. Stephen blinked. His polished rhythm, for the first time in the show, cracked. So what do you want, Chuck? He asked, almost mocking now. A tribute, a moment of silence, a round of applause for surviving memes in middle age. Chuck's voice cut through the room like a blade. I came here thinking you were better than this, Stephen. Silence. The audience was frozen, phones raised, some filming, others stunned. Chuck continued. You hide behind sarcasm like it's armor, but I've fought real battles. I've stood on real stages, ones that demanded more than a monologue and a spotlight. You think taking cheap shots at someone's legacy makes you bold? It doesn't. It makes you hollow. The room dropped a few degrees. Stephen, fidgeting now, leaned back and laughed nervously. Okay, now who's the dramatic one? But Chuck wasn't finished. When you invite someone into your space, he said, rising slightly from his chair but still poised, you honor them, even if you disagree with them, even if you think their time has passed, because that's what decent people do. They respect the path that brought someone here. A woman in the audience gasped, audible on the mic. Stephen muttered, Okay, Bruce Lee, under his breath. But Chuck heard it. He stood fully this time. You know what Bruce Lee taught me? Chuck said, stepping forward, not threatening, but towering. That the most dangerous man in the room isn't the one throwing punches. It's the one who knows when not to. Stephen chuckled weakly. Are you going to storm off now, too? You and your fragile feelings? Chuck paused, looked at the audience, then at the camera, then back at Stephen. No, he said, I'm not storming off. I'm stepping away so you can see what integrity looks like when it leaves the room. He reached for his mic pack and calmly unclipped it. Stephen stammered, Wait, Chuck, come on. You're seriously doing this on live TV? I don't play games where respect is the punchline. He turned, one step, then two. The audience began to clap, at first unsure, then louder. A slow, rising, deliberate applause. Stephen sat in his chair, stunned. The screen didn't cut to commercial. Not yet. It lingered just long enough to show a man choosing principle over popularity. For a moment after Chuck Norris left the stage, the studio was completely still. No music, no forced laughter, no clever punchline to patch the silence. Stephen Colbert sat frozen behind his desk, his signature smirk fading like the end of a bad joke told too late. He glanced at the camera, then at his crew. No cue cards, no escape. The network cut to commercial, but it was already too late. Clips of Chuck's walkout flooded social media within minutes. The hashtags exploded. Hashtag Chuck walks, tall, harsh respect over ratings, Colbert crossed the line. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, each platform became a battleground of opinions. But the majority wasn't confused. They knew what they had just witnessed. A TV host trying to humiliate a guest, and that guest, in turn, walking away with every ounce of dignity intact. Even some of Colbert's usual supporters turned on him and, I usually love Colbert, but this wasn't satire, it was petty. Chuck Norris didn't get owned. He taught a masterclass in self-respect. You don't poke legends and expect them not to stand up. The next day, news outlets across the political and entertainment spectrum ran headlines. Chuck Norris walks off Colbert and straight into public admiration. The night Stephen Colbert forgot where the line was. Martial arts master school's late-night host and live lesson on respect. The Late Show issued a vague statement calling it an unscripted moment in the spirit of late-night spontaneity. But viewers weren't buying it. Meanwhile, Chuck Norris released a brief, handwritten note on his official social media accounts. No PR filters, just his words. I've faced opponents in the ring, in film, and in life. But mockery dressed as comedy doesn't deserve a match. I walked away, not because I couldn't stay, but because staying would have meant lowering myself to a game I never agreed to play. In martial arts, the greatest move isn't the punch you throw. It's the one you hold back when your dignity is worth more. Chuck, that post alone received 2 million likes in a day. Colbert returned to air the next night. He opened the show with a nervous chuckle and a hollow joke about Chuck Norris karate chopping my ego. But the crowd didn't laugh the same way. The tension lingered, and so did the fallout. For weeks, Chuck Norris's short walk off that stage became more iconic than any roundhouse kick he'd delivered on screen. It was reposted, remixed, even turned into animated clips. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was powerful. He didn't yell, he didn't fight, he stood, he spoke, and he left. And in doing so, he reminded a cynical world of something they had almost forgotten. That strength isn't about domination, it's about discipline. And that silence, when earned, can speak louder than any applause. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel.